Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you very much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here. And I'll be really honest with you, I always feel a real fraud when I come into a kind of business environment, because my background, as you've heard, is in education, in schools and in teaching. So in my head, I kind of just regard myself as a teacher. There's nothing just about that, of course, but I think of myself as a teacher, and specifically a school leader. So it's still a real surprise to me, and it happens increasingly a lot, where I find myself in very posh tower blocks in the city doing talks, or here today doing this talk. So it's a real privilege to be here, and it's a real privilege to meet you all, and I hope you find it interesting and useful. So I'm going to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have some more cake. Deal? Lovely. Okay, so as you've heard, my name is Shaun Dellenty, or at Shaun Dellenty, as it seems to be these days. So I'm on Twitter, so if you want to come and follow me, please do follow me. If you want to tweet about this event, please do. And if you're going to take a photograph of me, please do it kind of above the waist. Bit too much cake this month already, actually. So I'm going to say to you, Happy Pride. We've kind of passed the official Pride month. We had Pride in London recently, but as far as I'm concerned, every day should be a Pride month, a Pride day. You know, it's great that we have these visibility-raising weeks and months, whatever, but actually every day should be a day when every human being, every naturally diverse human being, should be able to be proud of themselves without any fear of repercussion. But for now, Happy Pride, and the flags look wonderful, as do the cakes. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been a class teacher. I've been in education since 1992. I've been a class teacher. I've been a school governor, and I've been a school leader. And I trained for primary or elementary. And I have taught I've actually taught across the whole curriculum. And I've taught across the whole age phase. So although I trained for primary, I've also taught in middle school, high school, and secondary school as well. I've also worked as what's called an improving schools consultant, where you kind of travel around different schools and help them improve. I have written a lot for the press over the years. I've been doing this work for 10 years. I've advised on education policy and LGBT plus education policy at UK Parliament and with governments overseas. My work was recommended by the Church of England quite a few years ago now, and also the Faith and Beliefs Forum. And I was nominated or named a few years ago one of the 100 most influential LGBT people in the country. Now that, of course, means that when I go into a primary school and tell those young people that I'm gay, by the time I've left, they're all gay. Because that's how it works, you know. And we laugh. But, as I'm sure you are aware, there are some people in our world and in our country who believe that to be the case. That if I stand in an assembly hall in a primary school and talk about the fact that I'm married to my husband, that suddenly the children will make some mythical lifestyle choice and all become gay. That's my superpower, which of course it isn't. But you know, we do have to bear in mind these kind of myths and misconceptions that are out there that are increasingly being vocalized with more confidence, I think. Now, for the sake of this talk today, I will use the acronym LGBT+. Now, historically, my work has always been called Inclusion for All. And although I get kind of labelled as an LGBT+ advocate, actually what I advocate are schools and communities and a world, hopefully, in which every naturally diverse person can be themselves. But obviously my work has a particular emphasis upon young people as well. You will be aware, well, let's wind back. I'm 51 years old. Somebody look surprised, please. I'll do that again. I'm 51 years old. Brilliant, fantastic. Pay you later. 51 years old, and when I was growing up in the 70s, when I started to be aware of who I was, there were kind of 5 shoeboxes into which I could shove my identity. One said lesbian, one said gay, one said bisexual, one said transgender, and the other one said heterosexual or straight. And that was very limiting, and that enabled other people to kind of process who I was as a person, or who I was as part of a person, because those labels only represent a very small part of who we are. Now, what's wonderful, and I have the privilege of working with thousands of young people around the country and around the world, is that they increasingly are kind of pushing the boundaries and saying these labels and these boxes are very, very limiting, and they don't define us accurately And they are increasingly developing new ways of defining themselves, which is brilliant, I think. But if you're somebody working in a school, to get your head around all of those labels, and I know it's the same if you're an employer as well, it can be quite challenging. So my advice to anybody is don't get too hung up on those labels. It's about what's underneath that, and underneath them is a person in all of their 360, holistic, joyful human diversity. So it's about getting to know people for who they really are and what they can really bring to the world. But that's not to say that labels aren't important. And I think particularly when we're finding our identities and when we're younger, they're really, really important. And I know when I first came to London, I was very gay. You know, everything I did was very gay. Gay clubs, gay music, gay shops, gay t-shirts, gay hairdos. But as I've got older, I feel more comfortable in just being Shaun, who just happens to be married to another man. So our relationship to those labels can shift over time anyway. But what I want to say to you is I'm not placing hierarchy on human identities or relationships. My work is very much about making communities and schools safer places and more inclusive places for everybody, whoever they are. So, 51 years old, born in 1968. So when I was at primary school, when I was at elementary school, if we were in America, we'd be calling it that. And if I know there's some people watching in America, so hello to you. This is me at primary school, elementary school. So that's little Shaun, there I am. Now, by the time that picture was taken, I already knew. I knew that my name was Shaun, and I knew that, well, let's put it this way. When I was in the playground in the early 1970s, there was a very famous, successful pop group who was still pretty successful, actually, called ABBA. Mamma Mia, 1 and 2. Let's hope there's not a 3, eh? And there was a magazine called Lookin'. And people used to bring that magazine into the school playground and kind of talk about it and show pictures out of it. And they would bring in the posters. So people would bring in a poster with ABBA on it. And the other boys used to say to me, do you fancy the blonde woman in ABBA or do you fancy the brunette? And I would go really quiet. And I would go and stand by the PE store, which was in our playground. And I used to stand there and think, oh, we've got a problem. I fancy the guy with the beard. Now, no one had asked me to be like that. No one had made me like that, except presumably my parents and nature. Thank you very much. And I certainly hadn't made a choice. So the term lifestyle choice around LGBT plus identities, let's just throw that in the bin where it belongs now. I made no choice. It's just the way I emerged as a naturally diverse human being, and hey-ho, at the age of 51, that's still who I am. And after many years of challenge, I'm very proud and happy to be able to say that. That's who I am, without any sense of shame. But that, for me, is a privilege that I can do that. And it's a privilege that I shouldn't take for granted. So, similarly, my parents took me to see Dr. No, the James Bond film. And I took one look at Sean Connery and thought, well, there he is. That's going to be my husband when I get older. Okay, now, when I was in primary school, elementary school, back in the early 1970s, my classroom, or our classroom, was very heavily gender stereotyped. So one side of it was labelled as being action zone for boys, and the other side of it was for the girls. So one side was very pink and glittery and fluffy, and all the books about animals were there, actually, and I liked animals. And on the other side was combat netting and stuff to do with war and sport. And I walked in, and I was immediately drawn to the books about animals because I love reading about the animal world. And that's where I would go. And I was repeatedly told, you need to go back to the boys' side. You need to be more of a boy, be more of a man. And when the teachers weren't looking, I would repeatedly go back to the girls' side. And actually, over time, I felt more comfortable kind of hanging out and chilling out with the girls there. But again, my teachers would repeatedly take me back to the boys' side. And at parent-teacher evening, my teachers actually said to my parents in front of me, are you sure he's a boy? Are you sure he's a boy? So locked into their gender stereotypes were they, that it just didn't compute that this little boy could actually like some of the stuff that was for the girls and some of the stuff that was for the boys. And of course, it was only stuff for the boys or girls because the teachers had stuck labels on it and organised it in that way. And, you know, you will have, I'm sure, seen toy shops and magazine shelves and clothing stores where exactly the same thing happens and in some cases is still happening. So by the time I left primary school and elementary school and got to secondary school, I already had building up in me what I think of it as a bonfire. When we build a bonfire, we build it with twigs and leaves, rubbish. And for me, that bonfire was already being built. Except it wasn't a bonfire, it was kind of a pyre of shame. So by the time I left primary school, I already felt othered. I already felt like there was something wrong with me. That maybe that I had somehow been born on the wrong planet, in the wrong time. And that was something deeply wrong with me. Then I went to a big school, secondary school, in a town called Lutterworth, just outside Leicestershire. And literally from the first day, the very first day I arrived, an older boy stopped me outside and looked at me and he just went, you're one of them. You're a queer. And in those days, there was no positive, there was nothing positive linked to the word queer. And I had no strategies for dealing with that, so I kind of backed off and went and hid, which is exactly what he wanted. It was game on, control. So the next day, there were a big group of boys, and over time, other people got involved. And to cut a long story short, over the time that I was in secondary school, I was bullied very badly, not just with words, but with being beaten up, spat at, being isolated. And the small town that I lived in, which was a very small town, they would steal permanent marker pens out of the teachers' drawers and then use them to write Shaun is queer and other things all over the local shop front windows, the street signs, and most importantly, the bus shelter. And the bus shelter was a key one because that was what my parents used to get the bus to Leicester on a Saturday. And the thought of my parents finding out was the scariest thing in the world, because my mum had a faith that taught her that people like me really didn't have a time and place on earth. And my stepfather was a policeman in the early 1970s, what was called a CID officer. And his view of human diversity in all its forms was, let's just say it was unfavourable, to say the least. So I was being bullied at school. I couldn't tell my parents because they would have rejected me. I couldn't tell my friends because I didn't want them to think that I was gay. And I didn't tell my teachers because by the time I got to secondary school, we're in the 1980s, and there was a piece of legislation called Section 28. And Section 28 was introduced under Margaret Thatcher's government, and it essentially precluded teachers from even acknowledging that LGBT plus identities existed because that was perceived as promoting being LGBT plus. Now that word promoting, interestingly, is now being used again. And you may have seen the protests that are going on initially in the schools in Birmingham, but actually that's now cascading out across the country and affecting 70 schools at last count, where people that do what I do are being accused of promoting being LGBT plus, which I think is interesting. So if we talk about dogs in school, that's just learning, that's just information. If we talk about baking in school, that's just learning, that's information. If we talk about science in school, that's learning and that's information. But if we talk about the fact that some children have two mums or two dads, that's promoting. And that's rubbish. So we all need to be very clear when we talk about LGBT plus inclusion that we know what it is and what it isn't, and that we can be robust in our explanation of it. It's about education and information. It is not about me going into a school and saying, "Hi, children, all come and be homosexuals." Why would I do that? I don't need to do that because nature throws us up anyway. Well done, nature. You know, it's just part of the diversity of life. There is no need for someone like me to go and promote being LGBT plus, and it won't work anyway. But it's important that we know that and can communicate that distinction. But back in the 80s, Section 28 stopped teachers from talking about LGBT plus, even using those words. That meant that if people were being bullied like I was, we didn't see any allies, we didn't see any role models. Section 28 eventually was repealed in 2003, but there are people right now who are pushing for legislation like that to come back. So all of that bullying that I couldn't talk about, inevitably I internalized it. And I became clinically depressed, I became anxious, I started to take it out on myself, physically, let's just say that. And in the end, my thought process became this: what is the point in me going to lessons to study to learn, to do exams, to get a job, to live in a world that thinks that I deserve to go to hell, that thinks I'm no better than the muck under somebody's feet. And in the end, my pyre of shame that had been building all of those years, it got bigger than me. And it was fueled by stuff I was reading in the media. It was fueled by things I was hearing in my church and from my friends. It was everywhere. So in May 1987, it just got too high. And I left school before my exams. My exams became irrelevant. Getting out of bed in the morning, staying alive became more relevant. But in the end, it just got too much. So I left school without the knowledge and permission of my teachers, and I went home to my parents' house. I went up the stairs and I locked the bathroom door, and I very nearly never came out again. But I did. And that's a privilege. So it's a privilege for me to be able to be here with you all today, so thank you. But having done this work for 10 years now, I know, better than ever now, that there are countless people who in that position did not come out of the bathroom again. And I have also met, on my journey over the last 10 years, countless people who were there at the start who are not here now. Now, there might be people in the room who are this is resonating with you. And it might be that you were bullied for being gay or just for having the wrong trainers or the wrong mobile phone. Or maybe you fancied the wrong person in one direction. And really, whether it's being bullied for gay or being bullied because of the colour of your hair or your skin or your faith or a different ability, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing that we're talking about. It's dehumanising people, taking away from their time on earth, and it ain't right. So, let's lift it out of that place and take it to a more positive place. Because in time, and with therapy, that I was lucky to be able to access, I was able to go back and do my exams, and then I was able to go back and train to be a teacher. And by 2009, I was working as a school leader in a school at Canada Water, not too far from here, a primary school. And I was the primary school head a lot of the time. I was deputy head, but I was acting head a lot of the time. And then in November 2009, we did some questionnaires. We did a survey. With all of our students, our primary age pupils. And when we got them back, it was just before Christmas. I was in my office and I crunched the data, and it showed me that 75% of our students in our primary school were experiencing homophobic bullying on a daily basis. 98% of them were hearing the word gay used as what we call in South London a cuss. It's so gay, that's so gay. It was being used negatively, 98% of them, in a primary school. And this kind of, light bulb moment, I suppose, really, for me. I just thought, this stuff is still here in 2009. And I thought about those brilliant young people, those naturally diverse young people that sat in front of me in assemblies. And I imagined them going through what I went through and going up those stairs to the bathroom. And I thought, no, not on my watch, not ever. And for whatever reason, no. I knew we had to do something. So I thought I'll do some training, but I didn't know what to do. So I rang some larger LGBT plus organisations and I went, do you do training for primary schools around LGBT plus inclusion? And I was told repeatedly, not in primary, can't do it in primary, because if you do it in primary, you'll end up being reported in the press negatively as having an agenda or trying to promote something. And I went, I don't care. I'm a school leader and I've got evidence that my students are suffering and I know where that can lead, not on my watch. So after a bit of soul searching, which we wouldn't have done had that data been about racism, we'd have just got on and done it. After a bit of soul searching, that Christmas, I got lots of Advocar, cheap mince pies, and fueled on that, I wrote a training program and called it Inclusion for All for primary schools initially. We offered it out in my own school in the January. It was very successful. And then I started ringing up other heads initially in Southwark and going, do you know what? We've done this in primary school. It's been hugely powerful in lots of different ways. Would you like to have a go at it as well? And it just went boom very, very quickly. So I started to offer it out as a training program as well from my own school. So we did a training day every term, and we opened it out to whoever wanted to come. And very quickly, primary school teachers came, secondary school teachers started to come, faith school leaders started to come, and then we started to get people coming from businesses in Canary Wharf who'd actually read about the work that I was doing in the press because it was reported in the national press. I have to say, majoritively positively as well. And when I asked them, well, why are you coming to my training? It's for schools. And they went, because we've read what you talk about, and what you talk about is actually cultural and organisational change. And I kind of needed that reflected back at me to realise that myself. Then the Department for Education, Stonewall, Ofsted, the National College for Teaching and Leadership, all rocked up at the school and went, how come you're getting away with this in primary? And I went, whoa, that's interesting. Getting away with what? What do you think I'm doing? All I am doing is making young people and families and my colleagues feel safer and more included. Why is that getting away with it? And I did work with them all, just to kind of show them again that really it's about what is this work and what it isn't. And it's the what it isn't that tends to get reported in the press. And to cut a long story short on that, I've now, for the last 10 years, travelled around the UK, increasingly around the world, and I've personally trained around 40,000 educators alone in this country. But I've also worked with businesses, people like Amnesty International, the NSPCC, Church of England, the NHS and police, teacher training faculties, and as I've said, spoken at parliamentary committees and worked with politicians. The other thing I do is I go into school assembly halls and I talk about my journey and I talk about how difficult things were due to prejudice, but I also talk about how one person with very limited means, so I've never had sponsorship or funding at all I've had to rely on is essentially this big mouth of mine and my passion and social media, which I knew nothing about actually at the start. So everything I've done using social media platforms and just being unremittingly positive, I hope, and passionate. And I think that's something really important that we need to be, instilling in our young people, who quite often will use it just to troll each other and bully each other, from my experience. And schools will tell them don't do that, but then they don't give them something positive to do with it instead. So really the talks that I do with young people are around change, starting with us, and being able to get out there and change things for the better just using social media. And that's really where it led. And as a result of that, the field of LGBT plus education in primary schools opened up, and in faith schools as well. And that enabled some of the larger organisations then to come in and bring their resources into it. And just to kind of show you the level it's gone from that, writing that training programme one Christmas 10 years ago, this is a message that Sadiq Khan sent to me a couple of years ago, offering me support. Children should have the best possible chance of happiness and success. What happens at schools every day is hugely important. Schools can help children lead a healthy, happy lifestyle, including feeling safe from any form of bullying or discrimination. I did work with the Archbishop of Canterbury around preparing resources for preventing LGBT bullying in schools. This was back in 2013, and the Archbishop of Canterbury said all bullying, including LGBT bullying, causes profound damage, leading to higher levels of mental health disorders, self-harm, depression and suicide. And in May 2016, I was invited for tea and cake, they said, at 10 Downing Street. But when I got there, they announced that I was going to get an award from the Prime Minister. Actually, it came from the Cabinet Office. I don't think the Prime Minister really knew who I was, to be honest. But I was given an award called a Points of Light Award and designated as a Points of Light for the work that I did and am doing. And just to bring it right up to date, I'm currently engaged in a 3 to 5 year project with the Isle of Man. I don't know if you know about the Isle of Man, but the Isle of Man is essentially its own country with its own government. I think it's the oldest continuous government in the world, they claim. And it's had a long and checkered history with LGBT plus inclusion. So they're just getting their equality legislation in now. And it was illegal to be gay there, I think it was until the late 90s, actually. So this work is very new there, and it's a real privilege to be asked to do it and essentially take an entire country, not just the schools actually, but other services as well, on that journey towards LGBT plus inclusion. It's not something I ever thought I'd be doing in my life, to be honest, but what a privilege to be asked to do it. So my work has kind of morphed recently from inclusion for all, although that is still my core ethos, towards celebrating difference, purely because that's what my publisher, Bloomsbury, wanted to call my book. That was their decision, although the last chapter is called Inclusion for All because I wanted it to be. So here's the book. It came out about a month ago. It came out to coincide with Pride Month. So that's where the celebrating difference comes from. And from travelling around lots of businesses and schools over the years, increasingly what I've noticed, and I can see evidence of this here today, which is brilliant, that around the year there are, of course, lots of days and weeks of visibility, not just for LGBT plus identities, but for BAME identities and lots of other minority groups that would fall within what we call the protected characteristics of the Equality Act. Now, my stepfather, the policeman, he would look at those protected characteristics and say it was a politically correct tick list, because that's sadly still how he views the world. For me, what I always stress to people is why are those people and those types of people within the protected characteristics in the first place? Because they've experienced prejudice. That's why. If they hadn't have experienced prejudice and negative treatment, they wouldn't have to be within the protected characteristics. So what this does, this is actually a poster that was produced to go with the book. It kind of shows that around the year, there are lots of opportunities for visibility and intersectional visibility, and that's brilliant. And Pride Month and LGBT History Month are brilliant. But you know what? I really wish we didn't have to do them. Because as far as I'm concerned, every day should be LGBT History Month. Every day should be Pride Month. And a question that I ask teachers when I first work with them is this: where and when in schools did we learn about heterosexual lives, histories, and identities? Where and when in schools did we learn about heterosexual identities, lives, histories, and experiences? And the answer they always come up with is one word: everywhere. All of the time. So if we are taking away any hierarchy on human identities, then therefore that should be the same for LGBT plus identities too. Because at the end of the day, we all, I think, come from here, this blue planet. Blue planet. That's interesting, because recently when I've been going into staff rooms or workspaces, usually around a Monday or a Tuesday, there's often a bit of buzz about a program called Blue Planet, where people are kind of buzzed up about, is it Richard Attenborough? Yeah, I was getting mixed up. Richard Attenborough, and they're like talking about the snakes chasing each other, or polar bears. And I think that's really brilliant. And it reminds me of being at school myself, and being interested in animals, and being interested in the diversity of animal life and geographical life on this brilliant blue planet. And generally, I found, whether it's young people or adults, people generally like to learn about animal diversity and geographical diversity, whether it's through books when we're at school, or now websites, or by visiting them. I've never met anybody that comes to me and goes, do you know what, I've got a real problem. I've got a real problem with elephants. They're very different from me. They look very differently, they walk differently. They've got this kind of, really bothers me, I just don't like it. They've obviously made a lifestyle choice. I've never encountered that. Similarly, I've never encountered anybody going, do you know what? I was out walking the other day, and I walked along. I was in Scotland, and there was a mountain there. And I'd never come across a mountain before, and it was just really bothering me. It just stood there looking all mountainy. I've never encountered that. But when it comes to human diversity, to joyful, natural human diversity, suddenly, throughout my life, and I count myself in this too, so it's said without any judgment, people have a problem. Some people have a problem. Many people have a problem. Maybe all people have a problem, if we're honest. And as I said, I include myself in that. With difference, with human diversity. Now, this is one of the shocking LGBT plus agenda slides that I show when I'm in primary schools. When I go into primary schools and secondary schools and businesses, whatever it is, I'll talk about different family groups, different networks of affection. And within schools, I'll ask them to brainstorm how many different types of family groups they know. And they will start off with one or two. They'll go, oh, a mum and a dad, and maybe some children. Or they'll go, maybe like a single mum or a single dad. But once you get them going, they'll come up with about 50, 60 different types of family group. Because that's the reality of the world in which we live. After that, I'll say to them, thank you very much, brilliant, this is my family group. This is me getting married to my husband, Mike, at the Houses of Parliament in London in 2016. And they all go, ooh, your husband's beard's better than yours. Which sadly is true. But the fact that we're two men that have got married is like the least important thing. They are not interested in that. Or if they are, they kind of go, wow, yeah, actually, my aunt has got two friends that are two men and they're married. So it kind of resonates with them. Or they go, oh, that's new, not seen that before. And then they'll ask questions about it. But that's all fine. But when it goes back to the parents, not all of them, but some of the parents, so the child then goes home and goes, oh, this bloke called Shaun with a really rubbish beard came into our school today and he talks about being gay. Some of those parents like go off on one and they start talking about children being sexualised. Well, I might have shown them a picture of the wedding slide, but I didn't have another picture of what Mike and I may or may not have done on our wedding night, because that would have been age inappropriate, and it's not relevant anyway. When children in schools are learning about heterosexual weddings, they learn about the ceremony, they learn about the cake, they learn about what people wear, but you don't then go, and do you know what people do on their wedding night? Because that would be age inappropriate, it's not relevant. And it's no different if we're talking about gay relationships. And what I'm alluding to there is what I think is the number one barrier, the number one problem people have when they hear that somebody like me is talking about LGBT plus inclusion in schools. But it also sits under a lot of the stuff that I've had fired at me in bars, usually after somebody's had a Pinot Grigio or too much Kronenberg. And I did this slide as a joke initially, but it's proved to be very powerful. So it's a pie chart of my life. And you'll see from it that I sleep, that I work, that I travel, that I read, that I go to the gym, not enough, obviously, that I've been writing, that I walk my dog, and right at the bottom, there's a very small slither, and that doesn't reflect badly on my husband, I'm a very busy man, that says jiggy jiggy. And for jiggy jiggy, I mean sexual activity. It's this little part of my life, this little part of who I am. And yet, when you're LGBT+, repeatedly throughout your life, when people find out that you're gay, for example, that's where their brain goes, downwards, or to the bedroom. And I think that's really sad, because when I arrived here tonight, Phil and I were just stood around the corner here. I wasn't kind of ruminating on what you will get up to or don't get up to in your sex lives. And if I talk to you afterwards, that's not what I'm going to be thinking about and defining you by. And yet when you're LGBT+ and you say to someone, I'm gay, many, many times, that's where people's brains start to go. So if you think about a parent who hears that someone like me goes into a school and talks about LGBT+ identities, if their brain is going there, then understandably, they start to have a problem with LGBT+ education. And we're seeing that spreading around the country at the moment. For me, this work, whether it's in a business or a school, is very simple. It's about this. What do we really want for ourselves, our colleagues, our children, and our young people? Every word that we utter, every action that we take, every policy that we write, every strategy that we create has the potential to humanise other people or dehumanise them. It's as simple as that. What do we want? Do we want to feel safe, represented, validated, included, respected, or accepted? Or do we want to dehumanise other people and make them feel like they don't belong? And you will have seen increasingly, and this is going to be a huge problem when we go back after the summer holidays, people protesting, people handing out leaflets to parents outside of schools going, children are being sexualised. We need to go back to the days of Section 28. And what really upsets me about this is that when I wrote that book, I gathered together 50 examples of an activity that I've done in schools over the last 10 years, where I ask teachers, so professional educators, this question. What damage does prejudice-related bullying do to a human being, particularly to young human beings? And they brainstorm stuff from their own experience. So when I wrote the book, I gathered together 50 examples of that. And this is it, gathered together. This is from primary schools, secondary schools, and faith schools and teacher training faculties. So if young people do not have LGBT plus education, if young people do not feel that the teachers are going to stop them being bullied for being LGBT plus, it leads to feeling shameful, poor mental health, feeling isolated, feeling confused, depression, self-harm, potentially suicide. That's the reality of prejudice-related bullying. Not just for children, actually, but also for staff and for parents and carers as well. Now, we've had Pride Month, we've had Pride Week, and we had gay sandwiches this year. I don't like avocado, so I felt a bit cheated, actually. Yeah. And I think it's brilliant. I did a talk, let's just say, for a very large bank recently, and they got this huge rainbow flag. It was amazing. And it's brilliant. You know, when you go out to London on Pride Day and you see all of those pride flags everywhere, it is really wonderful, but I do then start to question it. And I think, so is it kind of ticked a box for you? What else are you doing? What lies behind that? So it's all very well having a gay sandwich and a gay logo, but, you know, what's it like for diverse employees? You know, do you work with bias? Do you work with the assumptions that our brains make? Do you work with diversity and intersectionality across the board? If you're working in a territory where the laws are not welcoming to LGBT plus people, how do you promote that within your organisation? So what I'm saying is visibility is brilliant, and knowing that there are people there who are allies is brilliant, and my goodness me, do we need it. But it does need to have some backup as well. And within an organisation, if you really strive to be LGBT plus inclusive, and therefore inclusive right across the board, it says that you're an effective leadership team, that you're creating a representative workforce and an inclusive workplace, you're implementing your statutory obligations under the Equality Act, that you're delivering your products and services in a way that promotes respect, not just in your own territory, but hopefully around the world. And it means that everybody in your organisation can, should they choose to be, 100% authentic. That they're not having to invest energy into lying about an aspect of their core identity. So, if we are not paying lip service to LGBT plus inclusion, what's that about? Well, it's recognising that LGBT plus people is just a label, and underneath that there's a very rich, complex human being, and they're all completely different. Things like blind recruitment, authenticity in leadership, open door policy for our customers and also for staff, and running allies programs, really, really important. And people throw around the term politically correct, but I would ask, what's the opposite of that? What's the opposite of politically correct? If we take that away, what does that leave? And from 51 years on planet Earth, I can tell you firsthand, it leads to hate and prejudice and exclusion, and sometimes even killing. Let's be real here. That's where it can lead. If you have networks and alliances that are encouraging diversity and inclusion, fantastic. And if you can get those networks and take them into schools and model to the schools how LGBT plus and other networks work, really powerful. If you, as a range of diverse professionals, are willing to go into schools and talk about your journey through life and your own identities, we need that. Brilliant. And you can talk about your career path as well. In terms of what you give out in social media, in terms of public information, how diverse is that? You know, I've not known your organisation long, but just from being here today, you know, we've had a chat about what you do, and I know you've got some good practice going on. Build on that and share it. If I was to look at your policies, would I see it there? Would I feel included or would I feel excluded? Use of respectful language and chosen pronouns. And it really is this, you know, if there's one key message, it's that we can change the world for the better. Even if we don't think we can, we can. So what have I learned? So I'm going to bring this to a close really now, but what have I learned in 10 years? 10 years of travelling around the country, increasingly around the world, meeting so many different people from so many diverse backgrounds. What have I learned? Well, I have learned that some people really, really care deeply about other human beings. They have great compassion, and they're able to work through their own propensity for bias and prejudice, fear, to a place where they can strive to include everybody and show compassion for them. Brilliant. That's what we need. But sadly, I've also learned, and I'm reminded of this almost on a daily basis, actually, that there are many people out there who hate us for being LGBT+, that would see us excluded, that would see us bleeding, that would see us dead. And that's a hard message to deliver, especially on a Friday afternoon. But that's the truth of it. And I have seen more of my friends and friendship group in the last few years be attacked in the last couple of years than in the 8 years preceding that. And I have had more online hate and threats in the last year than I had in the previous 9. So we must be on our guard, and we must be good allies for each other. Change starts with us. It should be modelled from the top. We should be striving to allow everybody to be authentic, but we should also be looking at prejudice and discrimination and how it affects everybody across a range of different groups. Yes, keep up with your brilliant LGBT and other diversity talks and events. If you can, go and act as role models in schools. If you can, set up networks, model those to schools how they work. Remembering that people aren't labels and allowing people to go on a journey. Like I said at the start, I am not without prejudice myself. I grew up in a very prejudiced household. I've had to learn to notice that and work with it positively and proactively, rather than just pretending it isn't there. Right now we need compassion and empathy, and I think it takes courage to be compassionate. It's dead easy to join in and have a go with somebody or with a group of people, denigrating another human being or a group of human beings. It's easy to do that. I remember doing it myself in the playground at school. I think it takes courage to stand up and be compassionate, even for people that you might not fully understand who they are and where they're coming from. That takes courage, and that's what we need right now. We also need to be acting without shame, because there's nothing shameful about being LGBT+, and believing that one voice can truly make a difference. I thought my life would be marking books, sitting in a classroom, and that's brilliant too, but I never ever thought that I would be invited to come and speak around the world, write a book, and do all the things that I continue to do. You can get out there and change the world for whatever it is that you feel strongly about. So to bring it to an end for today, I just want to kind of flag up the fact that I've just released a book. It would be rude not to. And I'm asking people to help me with this because my aim is to get a copy of this book into every single school in the country. Because what this book is first of all, it's my life story, the first chapter, but the rest of it is actually a process for cultural and organisational change in respect of robust and resilient LGBT+ inclusion. But there's also a lot in here about how to meet our own prejudices with compassion and work through them. And certainly when I started this work, I had to do that myself first, because I still had some stuff there that I hadn't worked through. And that's something that I say in schools and businesses. It's don't just tell people not to be prejudiced and tell them the right words to say. Create opportunities in which we can all bring curiosity to our own bias and prejudice and meet that with compassion and then work through it. And that's when we can become truly inclusive as human beings, but also as organisations. So, the book's on Amazon, by the way. And if you wanted to buy one and donate it to the school you used to go to, or a local school, that would be absolutely amazing. So to finish up, thank you for having me here today. Thank you for listening so intently and so respectfully. I'm aware it's a Friday afternoon and it's been a hot week and you're all tired, so thank you. And I hope this has been useful and relevant to you. I'm going to be around for a while, so if you want to come and talk to me or push cake in my face or any of those things, that's fine too. And at Shaun Dellenty, if you, quite often after I've spoken, people kind of need a bit of processing time, and that's okay. Absolutely it is. If you've got questions or you want to contact me, if you just Google my name, Shaun Dellenty, or go to www.shaundellenty.com and you can contact me through them. Some of you might be parents yourselves. You might have children that go to a school. If you think that school could benefit from LGBT+ inclusion training, you know where I am. But now, most importantly, I believe there's cake and maybe even some drinks. So wherever you are, thank you for listening. Thank you for having me here. And whoever you are, please do not let anybody ever detract from the naturally diverse, unique, brilliant human being that you are and that you absolutely deserve to be. Thank you.